November the 16th, 1944. The Hürtgen Forest is bleeding. Freezing rain cuts through the jagged, shattered pines, turning the dark German soil into a thick, sucking nightmare of mud and frozen blood. Major Heinrich von Delius lowers his heavy Zeiss binoculars and wipes the freezing condensation from the glass lenses. He is watching a massacre. Down in the ravine, roughly 300 meters past the Siegfried Line tank traps, an American infantry company has walked directly into the kill zone of his perfectly positioned MG-42 machine gun nests. The ambush was mathematically flawless. Within the first 30 seconds of the engagement, von Delius watched the American captain catch a burst of tracer fire straight across the chest. The lieutenants went down next, picked off by hidden German snipers before they could even unholster their weapons. By every rule written in the hallowed manuals of the Prussian military tradition, this battle is over. The head of the snake has been severed. The American soldiers should be paralyzed with fear. They should be cowering in the mud, waiting for an officer who will never come to tell them how to die. But von Delius is staring through the fogged lenses, and his breath catches in his throat. What is happening down in that valley? Why are they moving? He focuses on a single kid in the mud, a private with no insignia and no rank, who is entirely cut off from his platoon. The boy's M1 Garand rifle is jammed solid with freezing mud. By German doctrine, a soldier with a broken weapon and no commander must seek cover and await instruction. Instead, the American boy grabs a jagged rock from the freezing water and viciously smashes it against the charging handle of his rifle. The bolt snaps forward. He doesn't look around for a sergeant. He drops to his stomach, crawls through the freezing drainage ditch, and grabs a heavy canvas satchel charge from the rigid hands of a dead combat engineer. Across the ravine, another teenage private pinned down behind a shattered stump catches his eye. They are separated by 50 yards of screaming crossfire. They do not have a radio. They do not speak. The boy with the satchel charge simply gives a tiny, imperceptible nod of his steel helmet. The second private instantly kicks his Browning automatic rifle out into the open and unleashes a deafening, suppressive barrage directly at the German bunker. The boy in the ditch sprints. He is bounding from crater to crater, closing the distance to the pillbox while the heavy German machine gun is forced to shift its fire. Von Delius grips his binoculars so hard his knuckles turn white. He turns frantically to his aide, his voice trembling in the bitter wind. Who is signaling them? Where is the commander? The young German corporal stares back with wide, terrified eyes. There is no signal, Herr Major. There is no commander left alive. Von Delius looks back at the ravine, his mind desperately trying to fit this chaotic, hyper-violent reality into the perfect mathematical boxes of his military training. A German private does not organize a synchronized flanking maneuver against a concrete bunker without orders. It violates the very laws of military science. And yet von Delius is watching the American boy slide the high explosives directly into the narrow firing slit of the fortification. The reinforced concrete shatters into 1,000 pieces, and the legendary machine gun goes permanently silent. Von Delius feels a cold, heavy dread settle deep in his stomach. This is not an isolated incident. This terrifying, unexplainable phenomenon is happening across the entire European theater. Rewind the clock 5 months to the blood-soaked nightmare sands of Omaha Beach. June the 6th, the German defenders locked inside the massive concrete bunkers of Weiterstand's Nest. 62 are watching the slaughter unfold exactly as their supreme commanders promised. The American assault waves are being decimated in the surf. The officers are dead. The sergeants are bleeding out on the shingle. According to every psychological profile compiled by German intelligence, the leaderless American army should break right now. They should lie in the sand and wait to be captured. But look through the smoke. Look at the impossible things happening at the base of the seawall. A lieutenant who has absolutely no communication with his superiors suddenly stands up in the middle of a hail of bullets and screams at men he has never met before. He doesn't ask for permission to advance. He grabs a grenade and sprints directly at a German machine gun nest, and the men follow him. Why do they follow him? They don't know his name. In another sector, a completely anonymous private looks at the sheer cliffs spitting fire and simply decides that somebody has to take charge. He starts organizing a makeshift assault team out of terrified survivors from 5 different shattered companies. They don't share a radio frequency. They don't share a unit designation. When the surviving German prisoners are interrogated days later, they ask the American intelligence officers the exact same desperate question that von Delius asked in the forest. Who was commanding those small units on the beach? Who told them to climb the cliffs? The interrogators just laugh. Nobody gave the order. The privates gave the order to themselves. The German mind cannot process this. They are searching for a hidden doctrine, a secret training manual that explains how an army functions after its brain has been destroyed. They do not understand that they are fighting an enemy that doesn't need a brain to keep moving. Let us travel into the suffocating green hell of the Normandy hedgerows. July 1944. Major General Fritz Bayerlein of the elite Panzer Lehr Division sits in a dimly lit farmhouse studying his tactical maps with arrogant satisfaction. He knows exactly how the Americans must attack. The heavy Sherman tanks will be forced to climb up and over the ancient earthen walls of the bocage. When the tank tilts upward, its thin, unprotected belly armor will be perfectly exposed to the hidden German Panzerfaust teams waiting in the next field. The math is flawless. For weeks, the American advance is ground down to a crawling nightmare of burning steel. Bayerlein believes he has trapped the Americans in a rigid, predictable doctrinal box. He stands near the front line expecting to see a Sherman climb the hedge and expose its belly. But the Sherman does not climb. The roaring 40-ton machine accelerates with terrifying speed and smashes straight through the ancient earthen wall, as if it were made of wet cardboard. Bayerlein freezes in horror. As the dust clears, he sees massive, jagged steel teeth welded to the front of the American hull. The mechanical monster is ripping through the impenetrable hedgerows without ever exposing its weak points. Bayerlein's staff officers frantically search their intelligence files. Who designed this terrifying new weapon? Which Allied general ordered its deployment? They cannot find the answer because the answer breaks the fundamental rules of the German military universe. The truth is that this weapon was not invented by a general. It was invented by an enlisted sergeant who was tired of watching his friends die. He didn't wait for a solution from the Pentagon. He walked over to the beaches of Normandy, grabbed steel from destroyed German anti-invasion obstacles, fired up a welding torch, and solved the greatest tactical nightmare of the Western Front all by himself. Within days, 500 American tanks were fitted with these improvised steel horns. The entire German defensive strategy was shattered into 1 million useless pieces by a man who used to sell liquor in New Jersey. How do you fight an army where every single brain is actively working to dismantle your defenses? How do you predict the movements of an enemy that literally rewrites the rules of armored warfare while eating lunch in a muddy ditch? Fast forward to the freezing, desperate winter of 1944. The Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final apocalyptic gamble. The German General Staff has planned this massive armored offensive with microscopic, obsessive detail. They have calculated the exact fuel consumption of every single Tiger tank. They have mapped the exact hour Kampfgruppe Peiper will reach the Meuse River. They expect the green American infantry divisions to instantly shatter upon contact with the mighty Waffen SS. The German commanders ride in the cupolas of their massive 70-ton King Tiger tanks, smiling the cold, arrogant smile of men who believe they have reduced the chaos of war to a simple mathematical equation. but they are driving straight into a cultural meat grinder. Look at a tiny, strategically insignificant crossroads near the town of Stavelot. According to the brilliant German timetable, this crossroads must be captured intact by noon. Defending it is a scattered, terrified squad of American combat engineers. They have no heavy anti-tank weapons. The German commander looks through his optics and expects to see white flags. Any rational, mathematically sound doctrine dictates immediate withdrawal. You do not fight King Tiger tanks with M1 rifles. But the American engineers do not consult the manual. They do not run. A 20-year-old sergeant from the farmlands of Indiana drags a 55-gallon drum of raw fuel directly into the middle of the road. He kicks it over. The German tanks are closing in. The massive 88mm guns are. Lowering. The American sergeant fires a single flare into the spreading pool of gasoline. The entire crossroads erupts into a towering wall of absolute inferno. The sophisticated optics of the Tiger tanks are instantly blinded by thick black smoke. The brilliant, perfectly timed German schedule halts, and while the German panzer commanders frantically scream into their radios trying to find a doctrinal solution to a problem that was not in their briefing packets, the American engineers are already moving. A private pops up from a drainage ditch 30 yards from the lead tank. He doesn't verify target geometry with the commanding officer. He just aims a bazooka at the thin steel of the rear engine deck and pulls the trigger. The 70-ton monster grinds to a permanent smoking halt, physically blocking the entire road for the rest of the German column. The Americans vanish like ghosts back into the woods, running to the next crossroads to do it all over again. The German commander is left staring at the burning wreckage. His perfect timetable is destroyed. His mind is completely broken by the sheer illogical insanity of what just happened. Why did they fight? Who authorized them to destroy a civilian crossroads with raw gasoline? There are no rules. The American soldier is an improvisational artist painting with high explosives. Small bands of isolated leaderless Americans are turning the Battle of the Bulge into a logistical nightmare. They are blowing up bridges right in the faces of advancing panzers. They are switching road signs in the dark to send entire German battalions driving in circles. The German generals, sitting in their bunkers back in the fatherland, look at their maps and realize with suffocating terror that their massive, brilliant offensive is bleeding to death from 1,000 tiny, uncoordinated cuts. They expected to fight an army. They are fighting 1 million angry mechanics and farmers who have collectively decided to dismantle the German military machine, piece by piece. This is the terrifying climax of the cultural war. Let us jump forward to the pulverized streets of Cologne. March the 6th, 1945. In the shadow of the miraculously surviving Cologne Cathedral, a single German Panther tank is waiting in ambush. Its commander, Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth, is a seasoned killer. He has already destroyed 2 American Sherman tanks this morning. He is operating his Panther exactly as the manual dictates. Stop. Wait in ambush. Let the enemy drive into your crosshairs. But what comes down the street is not a Sherman. It is a shape Bartelborth has never seen before. An M26 Pershing. The German identification manuals have no picture of this tank. The rigid German training system relies on memorization. If you know the enemy tank, you know its weak spots. But Bartelborth is staring at a ghost. His brain, trained to rigidly categorize everything, freezes for a fraction of a second. He has his gun aimed, but he hesitates. He doesn't know what he is looking at. And in the unforgiving arithmetic of armored warfare, a fraction of a second is an eternity. Inside, the American Pershing Corporal Clarence Smoyer, a 21-year-old kid from the Pennsylvania coal mines with zero advanced gunnery training, is not hesitating. He doesn't care that he doesn't have the perfect textbook ambush position. His tank commander tells the driver to floor it. They drive directly into the open intersection while the German gun is pointing at them. What doctrine says you should drive a 46-ton tank into the open sights of a waiting enemy? None. It is suicidal. But they do it because a moving target is harder to hit, and they trust their aggressive reflexes more than they trust the manual. Smoyer is firing on the move. The American tank is shaking, vibrating violently over the rubble. It is the hardest shot a gunner can possibly take. But Smoyer doesn't pause to do the math. He aims and fires. The massive 90mm tungsten core round punches through the German steel like a needle through wet paper. It detonates inside the crew compartment. 3 shots in 45 seconds. The Panther is burning. Smoyer just defeated a perfectly positioned veteran German tank commander without using any advanced doctrine. He used pure, unadulterated, aggressive instinct. The German officer hesitated because his system failed to provide him with the correct information. The American gunner succeeded because his system didn't care about perfect information. It only cared about killing the enemy before the enemy killed him. And just 1 day later, the final psychological blow falls at the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. Major Hans Scheller is standing on the eastern bank of the Rhine. The massive steel railway bridge is wired, with 3 tons of explosives. He has the detonator. He has the screaming strategic necessity to blow the bridge and save the German heartland. But he does not press the plunger. Why? Because he is paralyzed by bureaucracy. He is terrified of blowing the bridge too early without a perfectly documented written authorization from his missing superior officer. He is a man who would rather risk losing the entire Second World War than violate a paperwork protocol. On the western bank, a 22-year-old American lieutenant named Carl Timmerman looks at the bridge. His orders are incredibly simple. Secure the town and wait. Nobody in the Allied High Command genuinely believes a bridge over the Rhine will be captured intact. Doctrine dictates that Timmerman should dig a foxhole and wait for the generals to do their jobs. But Timmerman sees the explosives haven't detonated. He doesn't call General Eisenhower. He doesn't wait for an operational memo. He turns to a group of exhausted, terrified teenagers and screams at them to run across 300 yards of rigged explosive steel suspended over a freezing river. Who does that? What academy teaches a junior officer to look at a rigged trap and say, "Let's see what happens"? The American culture teaches it. So they run. The German machine guns open up. The American boys are taking cover behind steel girders, shooting back, while literally cutting the wires to the German explosives with their pocket knives. American privates playing amateur bomb squad in the middle of a screaming firefight because waiting for engineers would take too long. On the eastern bank, Scheller finally snaps out of his paralysis and screams the order to detonate. The plunger twists. A massive roar rips through the valley. The bridge lifts into the air, but as the smoke clears, it settles back down. The backup explosives were too weak, and through the smoke, the Americans keep coming. They don't retreat. They run faster. Within minutes, they are on the eastern bank. They have crossed the Rhine not because of a grand strategic vision, but because a single junior officer looked at a chaotic situation and completely ignored his standing orders. And Eisenhower doesn't punish Timmerman. He laughs out loud and orders the entire army to instantly pivot and pour across that bridge. That is the undeniable difference. The German system murders officers who break the rules. The American system gives them a medal and rewrites the war plan on the back of a napkin. This is how the war ends. Not won by the nation with the best doctrine, but won by the nation that didn't need a doctrine to know how to fight. Won by the privates who became generals in the dark. Won by the mechanics who welded steel teeth onto tanks. Won by the truck drivers who ignored the rules. Won by a culture that believed down to the deepest, most fundamental level of its soul that the individual human mind, unleashed, unconstrained, and fiercely free, is the most powerful, unstoppable force in the universe. And that is why von Delius lowered his binoculars in the Hürtgen Forest and felt terror. He was not looking at an army. He was looking at the future, and the future was not going to wait for orders. Shift the geography. The European war is ending, but halfway across the world, another empire is making the exact same fatal miscalculation. August the 21st, 1942. Guadalcanal. The air is so thick with humidity it feels like breathing hot water. Colonel Kionao Ichiki stands at the edge of a coconut grove staring across the dark shallow water of Alligator Creek. He commands 917 of Japan's finest elite infantrymen, men who have conquered Asia without a single defeat. He looks at the American defensive line through the jungle canopy. He knows exactly what is going to happen because his military doctrine has already written the script. Japanese military philosophy is built on Yamato Damashi, the indomitable spirit of the warrior. Japanese intelligence has assured him that the Americans are soft, undisciplined, and materialistic. They value personal comfort over collective sacrifice. When faced with the terrifying psychological pressure of a night assault with fixed bayonets, they will inevitably break and run. Ichiki draws his sword. The order is given. The jungle erupts into a shrieking nightmare. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers charge across the sandbar, screaming their battle cries, expecting the terrified American Marines to flee into the dark. This is how it has always worked. But Ichiki watches from the tree line and his absolute certainty begins to crack. The Americans do not run. They do not panic. Instead, the dark tree line illuminates with a blinding synchronized wall of muzzle flashes. The water cooled. 30 caliber machine guns tear through the Japanese assault waves with sickening precision. When the Japanese soldiers actually reach the American foxholes expecting the soft Westerners to surrender, they are met with a level of close-quarters savagery that matches their own. Marines are fighting with rifles, pistols, bayonets, and bare hands. Ichiki watches an American machine gun position take a direct grenade hit. The gunner, Private Al Schmid, is struck in the face with shrapnel, destroying both of his eyes. By every rule of Japanese spiritual superiority, a blinded, wounded man should stop fighting. But Schmid doesn't stop. Guided only by the touch of his assistant gunner, the blinded Marine continues to operate his weapon, firing directly into the sound of the approaching enemy until dawn. By sunrise, 800 of Ichiki's men are dead. The colonel cannot explain what he has just witnessed. He burns his regimental colors to prevent their capture and dies in the jungle, his worldview completely shattered by teenagers who were supposed to be cowards. But the Japanese high command refuses to believe it. They assume Ichiki simply used the wrong tactics. They send Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi with 6,000 veteran soldiers to do the job properly. September the 12th. Kawaguchi attacks from the south through the dense jungle, aiming for a ridge that overlooks the critical American airstrip. It is a brilliant, unexpected maneuver. The Japanese strike in the dead of night. The fighting is so close and so desperate that Japanese soldiers breach the American lines multiple times. They are within a few hundred yards of the airfield. The American perimeter is bending, breaking, falling back. According to Japanese doctrine, this is the moment the enemy shatters. But the enemy does not shatter. In the middle of the chaos, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, a man with red hair and a reputation for extreme aggression, stands completely exposed in the open. He doesn't retreat to a command bunker. He doesn't write a formal situation report. He just points at the bloody dirt under his boots and shouts over the deafening roar of artillery. "The ridge," he tells them. "This is the ridge. Hold it." And the Marines hold. When they run out of ammunition, they swing their rifles like baseball bats. They fight with knives and bare fists, hunting down the Japanese infiltrators in the dark. By dawn, Kawaguchi's massive assault is completely broken. Over 600 of his men are dead on the slopes of what will forever be known as Bloody Ridge. The Japanese system is fundamentally incapable of processing this information. The military culture does not encourage honest reporting of failures. To admit that the Americans are spiritually equal is to risk disgrace. So they lie to themselves. They blame the jungle. They blame the supplies. They commit even more men. October the 24th, the ultimate test of the two military philosophies. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake launches a massive coordinated assault using over 20,000 troops, including the elite Sendai Division. He is so confident that his staff has already prepared the detailed plans for the American surrender ceremony. The main attack hits the southern line. Defending one section of that line is a 25-year-old Italian-American sergeant from New Jersey named John Basilone. He commands two sections of heavy machine guns. Through the pitch-black night, approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Sendai Division throw themselves at Basilone's position. It is a tidal wave of human bodies. In the Japanese system, a man is a cog in a divine machine fulfilling his destiny through sacrifice. In the American system, a man is an individual who simply refuses to let the guy next to him die. Basilone fights without sleep or food. When his ammunition runs low, he doesn't call a logistics officer. He sprints 200 yards through a wall of Japanese crossfire carrying 90 pounds of weapons and ammunition on his back. When his gun crews are killed, he mans the weapons himself. The water jackets on his machine guns boil away. The barrels glow red-hot in the dark. When the guns jam from the continuous heat, Basilone strips them down and repairs them completely barehanded, burning his own flesh on the superheated steel while bullets snap past his head. The Japanese keep coming. The bodies pile up so high in front of his trench that they literally block his field of fire. He has to leave his fighting position and push the corpses of the enemy aside just to clear a line of sight to keep shooting. By dawn, the elite Sendai Division is shattered. The ground is carpeted with the dead. After the battle, an American officer named Chesty Puller interrogates a captured Japanese prisoner. He asks a simple logical question: why did you not change tactics when you saw you were not breaking our line? Why did you not shift to a weaker spot? The prisoner's response perfectly encapsulates the doom of the Axis powers. That is not the Japanese way, he says. The plan had been made. No one would have dared to change it. It must go as it is written. This is the fatal rigidity. The Japanese officer who changes a failing plan violates the chain of command and risks disgrace. The American officer who changes a failing plan gets a medal. The Japanese rely on spiritual superiority to overcome material disadvantage. But Guadalcanal proves the terrifying truth. The Americans possess the exact same spiritual ferocity, the exact same willingness to die in the mud, but they combine it with a culture that constantly, ruthlessly adapts. They do not wait for orders to survive. And that is why the Japanese Empire died in those jungles just as the 1,000-year Reich died in the ruins of Europe. The jungle rots away and is replaced by the freezing thin air of the stratosphere. December the 20th, 1943, 25,000 feet above the German city of Bremen. Luftwaffe Lieutenant Erich Hager sits in the cramped cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109. He is hunting. Through his heavy armored glass, he spots a straggler. An American B-17 Flying Fortress has dropped out of its protective combat box. It is trailing thick, oily black smoke from its No. 3 engine. Hager pushes his throttle forward and closes the distance. He knows exactly how to dismantle this massive machine. German aerial doctrine dictates a head-on pass to kill the cockpit crew. Hager lines up the heavy American bomber in his Revy gun sight and squeezes the trigger. His 20mm cannons roar. The high-explosive shells rip directly through the plexiglass nose of the B-17. Hager banks away sharply and circles back to watch the giant aircraft die. He knows the damage is catastrophic. He saw the strikes right on the flight deck. By every law of aviation and military protocol, a heavy four-engine bomber cannot function when its command center is destroyed. The pilot and co-pilot are either dead or incapacitated. The internal communication lines are severed. The aircraft should now enter an uncontrollable death spiral, or the surviving crew should be throwing themselves out of the escape hatches with parachutes. Hager watches and waits for the inevitable. But the inevitable does not happen. The massive, crippled bomber suddenly violently levels its wings. It does not drop. It does not spin. Hager flies closer, his brow furrowing in confusion. The fuselage of the B-17 is shredded like a tin can. Through the massive holes in the aluminum skin, Hager can actually see inside the aircraft. What he sees defies all logic. The pilot is slumped over the yoke, unconscious and bleeding. The co-pilot is dead. The radio operator's equipment is completely obliterated. There is no commander flying this airplane. There is no intercom system connecting the crew. Yet the top turret is actively tracking Hager's fighter. The damaged waist guns are spitting fire. Who is flying the plane? Hager pushes his aircraft to within 50 yards of the American bomber. He peers through the shattered waist window. A 19-year-old kid wearing a leather flight jacket and a blood-soaked oxygen mask is standing on a narrow catwalk over a gaping hole in the floor. This kid is not a pilot. He is a waist gunner. He has zero flight training. But when the cockpit was shattered, this kid did not wait for a bailout bell that was never going to ring. He unhooked his oxygen hose, held his breath in the freezing stratosphere, dragged the unconscious pilot out of the seat and grabbed the control yoke. He is flying a 40,000-pound machine based entirely on watching the pilot do it over the last 3 months. In the back of the plane, the tail gunner has a shattered leg. He hasn't called for a medic because the wires are cut. He simply unbuckled his heavy leather belt, wrapped it around his own thigh, twisted it tight with a wrench to stop the bleeding, and went back to firing his twin 50-caliber machine guns. In the shattered fuselage, the navigator is literally tying severed steel control cables back together with parachute cord and thick leather bootlaces. Hager stares in absolute disbelief. This is a dead machine. It has no brain. It has no central nervous system. It is mathematically and mechanically destroyed. But the surviving crew members have spontaneously, seamlessly transformed into a single living organism. They are not waiting for an officer to tell them what to fix. The gunner became the pilot. The navigator became the mechanic. The wounded became the medic. They are keeping 70,000 parts of shattered aluminum in the air through sheer unadulterated willpower and mechanical improvisation. Hager pulls away without firing another shot. He returns to his base and tells his commanding officer that the Americans have built ghost planes that fly themselves after the crews are killed. He cannot admit the truth. He cannot process that he is fighting a culture where a teenage mechanic simply decides he is a pilot now because the situation demands it. The German system relies on highly specialized experts operating within their designated roles. When the expert dies, the function ceases. The American system relies on farm boys who take apart tractor transmissions for fun. When the expert dies, the farm boy just grabs a wrench and figures it out. Drop 25,000 feet straight down to the jagged coast of France. June the 6th, 1944. Pointe du Hoc. The sheer limestone cliffs rise 100 vertical feet straight out of the freezing English Channel. At the top of these cliffs, a German artillery battalion is dug into reinforced concrete casemates. The German commander is looking down over the edge. He is completely calm. He is watching American Ranger battalions disembarking from landing craft into the churning surf. The German commander knows that assaulting a vertical cliff from the sea is a tactical impossibility. It is a suicide mission. The Germans have cut the rope ladders. They are dropping hand grenades directly onto the narrow rocky beach. The American casualties are staggering. The German commander watches through his binoculars as the lead American officer, a captain trying to secure a grappling hook, takes a piece of shrapnel to the throat and collapses into the bloody water. The German smiles. The assault is broken. Without the commanding officer to coordinate the intricate specialized task of cliff scaling, the enlisted men will huddle on the beach and wait to be slaughtered. But the German commander's smile slowly vanishes. He leans closer to the edge of the cliff, ignoring the incoming naval gunfire. Down on the beach, the Rangers are not huddling. A dirt-covered corporal looks at his dead captain. He looks at the severed rope ladder hanging halfway down the cliff. He doesn't look for a radio. He pulls a heavy trench knife from his boot. He leaps onto the sheer rock face and violently drives the steel blade directly into a crack in the limestone. He tests his weight on it. He steps up. He pulls a bayonet from a dead soldier and drives it into the rock above him. He is building his own ladder out of weapons. Another private, without saying a word, grabs a heavy steel grappling hook in his bare hands, spins it like a lasso, and throws it straight up. It catches a coil of barbed wire. The private starts climbing hand over hand up the jagged rock, while German bullets spark and ricochet around him. They are climbing over the bodies of their own squad leaders. They are not waiting to reorganize. They are not waiting for a new captain. The German commander frantically screams for his men to fire down, but the Rangers are moving too fast. They are climbing like spiders. Bloody, muddy hands reach over the edge of the cliff. A Ranger pulls himself up, rolls over the barbed wire, and instantly fires his Thompson submachine gun from the hip. He doesn't wait for his squad to form up. He doesn't establish a doctrinal beachhead. He sprints alone directly toward the concrete casemate, dropping a fragmentation grenade into the air vent. The German commander is killed in the explosion, his perfect defensive theory shattered by men who simply refused to acknowledge that a vertical cliff without a ladder was an unsolvable problem. This is the nightmare that keeps the Axis commanders awake. They map out the battlefield. They calculate the angles. They eliminate the officers. They create situations where logic dictates the enemy must stop, and the enemy just keeps coming. The cliffs of France fade into the deep, churning waters of the Philippine Sea. October the 25th, 1944. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita stands on the enclosed bridge of the Yamato. He is commanding the center force of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Beneath his boots is the heaviest, most heavily armed battleship ever constructed by human hands. It is a floating fortress of unstoppable mathematical supremacy. He raises his optical rangefinders and looks through the morning mist. He sees his target. It is an American escort carrier task unit codenamed Taffy 3. It is a collection of slow, unarmored escort carriers and tiny, thin-skinned destroyers. Tin cans. Kurita knows the rules of naval engagement. Naval warfare is a strict science of tonnage and armor. Thickness. When a vastly superior battleship fleet catches a vulnerable escort group, the escorts must turn and flee. They must drop smoke screens and desperately broadcast for rescue. Kurita orders the Yamato's massive 18-inch guns to open fire. The shells weigh as much as automobiles. They displace the water like falling meteors. He watches the horizon expecting the American ships to scatter. But the American ships do not scatter. One of the tiny American destroyers, the USS Johnston, breaks formation. It does not turn away. It turns its bow directly into the teeth of the entire Japanese armada. Kurita lowers his rangefinders. He wipes the glass. He looks again. This is not a tactical maneuver. This is a suicide charge. The American destroyer is charging a fleet of cruisers and battleships alone. Inside the Johnston, the situation is rapidly disintegrating. Japanese shells tear through the thin steel hull. The bridge is hit. The central fire control director is completely destroyed. The radar is gone. The internal communication lines are severed. By every manual printed in the naval academies of the world, the ship is now combat ineffective. The main guns cannot receive targeting coordinates. The ship is blind. But deep inside the armored gun mounts the enlisted gunners do not wait for the bridge to come back online. A 20-year-old gunner's mate strips off his useless headset. He throws it onto the steel deck. He reaches down and shifts the heavy 5-inch gun into local control. He grabs the manual steel cranks. He is turning a massive hydraulic weapon entirely by hand. He peers through the open sighting hatch. He does not have a radar trajectory. He does not have wind calculations. He just looks at the looming gray silhouette of a Japanese heavy cruiser and aims the naval gun like he is shooting a hunting rifle at a tin can on a fence post. He steps on the firing pedal. The gun roars. He hits the cruiser. Below deck, the engine room is filling with seawater. A main steam line has ruptured. Superheated steam is venting into the confined space. An engineer does not wait for a damage control officer to assess the situation. He grabs a heavy wrench. He wraps his own asbestos-lined gloves around the boiling pipe. He physically holds the pressure valve shut so the ship's turbines can keep spinning. The Johnston continues to charge. It is burning. It is sinking. But its guns do not stop firing. Kurita stands on the bridge of the Yamato completely paralyzed by indecision. His perfect fleet is being swarmed by men who are not playing by the rules of naval warfare. He watches the American destroyers pressing the attack until they literally slip beneath the waves. His mind desperately searches for a logical explanation. He concludes that this must be a trap. No military force acts with this level of suicidal aggression unless they are baiting him into a massive hidden reserve fleet. The sheer illogical insanity of the American sailors breaks the nerve of the Japanese admiral. Kurita orders his invincible armada to turn around and retreat. The Japanese Empire's last great naval offensive is stopped not by a superior strategy but by a handful of farm boys and mechanics who simply refused to accept that their ship was supposed to sink. The ocean swallows the wreckage and the war moves to the land. The suffocating volcanic ash of Okinawa. April 1945. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima has abandoned the beaches. He has built the perfect subterranean defense, the Shuri Line. It is a masterpiece of military engineering. Miles of interlocking tunnels deep beneath the earth. Reinforced caves. Hidden machine gun ports. Ushijima knows that American air superiority is useless against solid rock. He knows that naval artillery cannot penetrate the earth. He sits in his dimly lit underground command post listening to the muffled thuds of the American bombardment far above him. He is incredibly patient. He knows the doctrine of siege warfare. The Americans will be forced to send their infantry into the dark. They will have to clear the tunnels room by room with rifles and grenades. It will take months. It will cost tens of thousands of American lives. Ushijima sips his tea. He waits for the Americans to play his game. But the Americans do not play his game. Above ground, an American combat engineer stares at a heavily fortified cave entrance. He sees the interlocking fields of fire. He knows that sending his squad into that black hole is a death sentence. He does not order a charge. He does not write a requisition form for specialized bunker-busting munitions that might arrive in 3 weeks. He walks over to a motor pool. He looks at a rusted armored bulldozer. He looks at a Sherman tank that had its main gun destroyed by a landmine. He gathers 3 mechanics from a maintenance battalion. They do not sleep. They spend the entire night under the glare of portable floodlights cutting thick steel plates with acetylene torches. They weld the heavy armor directly onto the bulldozer. They strip a high-pressure flamethrower from the broken tank and bolt it to the front of the dozer blade. They attach a massive trailing trailer filled with 400 gallons of jellied gasoline. The sun rises over Okinawa. Ushijima sits in his cave expecting to hear the cautious footsteps of American infantry. Instead, he hears a deep mechanical grinding noise. It sounds like a train moving over rocks. The ground vibrates. The Japanese machine gunners at the cave entrance open fire. Their bullets spark and ricochet harmlessly off the improvised steel plates of the approaching monster. The American driver ignores the gunfire. He rolls the armored bulldozer directly up to the mouth of the cave. He does not send men inside. He simply lowers the heavy steel blade. He pushes a massive pile of dirt rocks and coral directly over the entrance. He seals the cave shut. He throws the dozer into reverse. He pulls a lever. The customized flamethrower ignites. He pumps 50 gallons of burning napalm directly into the cave's narrow ventilation shaft. The fire sucks all the oxygen out of the tunnel system. Deep underground Ushijima listens to the mechanical roar fade away. The lights flicker and die. The air begins to thin. He realizes with absolute clarity that his subterranean fortress is not a defensive masterpiece. It is a tomb. The Americans did not bleed for the cave. They simply buried it and moved on. The Japanese commander had built a perfect lock, but the Americans didn't bother looking for the key. They just brought a sledgehammer and shattered the entire door. This is the recurring nightmare of the Axis commanders. They spend years building perfect systems. They train their officers to execute flawless mathematical strategies. They assume that warfare is a rigid contest of competing doctrines. But the American soldier does not carry a doctrine in his rucksack. He carries a deeply ingrained cultural absolute that every problem has a mechanical or violent solution. If the gun breaks, you hit it with a rock. If the ship loses its radar, you aim by looking down the barrel. If the enemy hides in a cave, you weld armor to a tractor and bury him alive. The German generals in their pristine European castles and the Japanese commanders in their Pacific jungles made the exact same fatal miscalculation. They looked at the chaotic, unpolished, disrespectful American troops and saw weakness. They did not understand that a society built on the complete freedom of the individual produces a soldier who is immune to paralysis. When the chain of command breaks, the Axis soldier stops to wait for instructions. When the chain of command breaks, the American soldier just takes a deep breath, looks at the guy next to him and says, "Let's figure this out." Rewind to the midnight sky over France. June the 5th, 1944. The Normandy drop. The German High Command, sitting in their warm concrete bunkers, expects a textbook airborne operation. They expect defined drop zones. They expect concentrated perimeters. They expect senior officers to gather their men and strike specific logistical targets based on a rigid operational timetable. The reports start flooding into the German switchboards at 2 in the morning. They are absolutely baffling. American paratroopers are landing everywhere. They are in the swamps. They are in the trees. They are crashing through the roofs of civilian greenhouses. The German regional commander stands over his map table and demands to know the location of the enemy's Schwerpunkt, the focal point of the attack. He needs the center of gravity so he can launch a structured counteroffensive, but the radio operators cannot give him one. Every single German patrol is reporting contact. A German lieutenant leads a motorized patrol down a dark country lane near Sainte-Mère-Église. He is confident. He knows that scattered isolated airborne troops without heavy weapons or central command will hide until morning. He drives directly into a crossfire. The German half-track is hit by a bazooka. The lieutenant takes cover in a ditch. He orders his men to return fire. He tries to analyze the enemy squad. But the enemy squad is not a squad. It is 2 privates from the 101st Airborne, a corporal from the 82nd, and a lost glider pilot who literally met each other in the dark 10 minutes ago. They don't know each other's names. They don't share a unit designation. They don't have a radio. They just heard a truck in the dark and silently agreed to destroy it. The German lieutenant is captured. He looks at the ragtag group of men in baggy uniforms. He demands in broken English to speak to the commanding officer so he can formally surrender his weapon. The Americans look at each other. A private chewing on a piece of grass steps forward, takes the officer's Luger pistol, shoves it in his own belt, and tells the German to start walking. The German officer's mind fractures. He realizes that he was not defeated by a superior tactical plan. He was defeated by three strangers who decided to start their own private war in the middle of a French orchard. The German High Command spends the entire night paralyzed. They hold their heavy panzer divisions in reserve because they cannot figure out where the American main effort is located. They are trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution. The Americans have weaponized the chaos. Because they do not need officers to tell them how to fight, they simply attack whatever is directly in front of them. The German system relies on a central nervous system to coordinate the limbs. The American army in Normandy is 1 million severed limbs that are all independently choking the life out of the German defenses. Move forward to October 1944. The ancient German city of Aachen, the first major city on German soil to face an American assault. The German commander defending the southern sector is a veteran of Stalingrad. He knows urban warfare. He knows the brutal geometry of the streets. He has turned his neighborhood into a meat grinder. He has heavy machine guns positioned in basement windows sighting perfectly straight down the cobblestone avenues. He has snipers in the church towers. He has anti-tank guns hidden behind piles of rubble. He is waiting for the Americans to do what armies have done for thousands of years: march down the street. He is waiting to unleash hell. He looks at his watch. The American artillery barrage has lifted. The assault should be starting, but the street remains completely empty. He hears nothing but the crackle of burning timber. Then he hears a muffled explosion, but it is not in the street. It is inside the building to his left. He frowns. A minute later, another muffled explosion. Closer this time. The building next door shakes. The German commander grabs his submachine gun. He does not understand. The street is still empty. Why is the noise coming from inside the walls? He realizes the terrifying truth far too late. The Americans are not using the street. A squad of infantry led by a 20-year-old sergeant realized that walking down the avenue was suicide. They didn't call the battalion commander to ask for a new strategy. They just walked into the first house on the block, pulled the pin on a grenade, and blew a massive hole in the adjoining living room wall. They stepped through the dust shot, the Germans hiding in the kitchen, blew a hole in the next wall, and kept going. It is called mouse-holing. The German commander is waiting for a frontal assault that will never come, while the Americans are violently tunneling through the interior walls of his own fortress. He hears the brickwork shatter directly behind him. The wall of his command post blows violently inward in a cloud of plaster and pulverized brick. Before the dust can even settle, an American private steps through the ragged hole and fires a burst from a Browning automatic rifle. The veteran of Stalingrad dies on the floor of a bakery, never having seen a single American in the street he spent 3 weeks preparing to defend. The German doctrine assumed that the physical architecture of the city would dictate the flow of the battle. The American doctrine was simply that if a wall is in your way, you turn it into a door. Shift the horizon back to the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. June 1942. The skies over Midway. Japanese fighter pilot Saburo Sakai is one of the deadliest men in the world. He flies the Mitsubishi A6M0. It is an aerodynamic masterpiece. It can turn tighter and climb faster than anything the Americans have in the air. Sakai knows the strict mathematical rules of dogfighting. If he gets on the tail of an American Grumman Wildcat, the American is dead. There is nothing the heavier, slower American plane can do to escape the firing solution. Sakai spots 2 Wildcats flying in a loose formation. He dives. He slides perfectly into the blind spot of the trailing American fighter. He prepares to fire. According to the textbook, the American pilot must now violently break away and try to dive out of trouble. But the American doesn't break away. He continues to fly in a straight level line. Sakai is confused. Is the pilot asleep? Is he frozen with fear? Sakai touches the trigger. Suddenly, the second American Wildcat, a plane that was completely out of the fight, violently banks inward. It turns aggressively back towards Sakai and its own wingman. The two heavy American fighters cross paths in midair, flying directly at each other like two trains on the same track. Sakai's brain struggles to process the geometry. The American planes pass within feet of each other. And in that exact second, Sakai realizes he is no longer the hunter. By staying on the tail of the first plane, he has flown directly into the head-on gun sights of the second plane. The heavy 50 caliber machine guns of the crossing Wildcat tear into the thin, unarmored aluminum of Sakai's Zero. The Japanese ace is forced to violently break off the attack. His perfect aircraft damaged his perfect doctrine, completely inverted. He just witnessed the Thatch Weave. It is a brilliant, devastating aerial maneuver that completely neutralizes the technological superiority of the Japanese Zero. But the most terrifying thing about the Thatch Weave is not the geometry. It is the origin. It was not developed by a board of senior admirals in Tokyo. It was not tested for years in secret aeronautical wind tunnels. It was invented by a 36-year-old Navy pilot named John Thatch, who was sitting at a kitchen table in San Diego playing with wooden matchsticks, trying to figure out how to keep his friends from getting killed. Thatch didn't write a formal proposal to the Department of the Navy. He just took his squadron up in the air and said, "Try this." The American military didn't punish him for ignoring the established aerial combat manuals. They instantly adopted the maneuver and spread it across the entire Pacific Fleet. The Japanese aviators returned to their aircraft carriers in absolute shock. They have the better plane. They have the better training. They have the samurai spirit. But they cannot defeat an enemy who views the rules of combat as temporary suggestions. The Japanese military structure is a rigid katana blade. It is razor sharp, but if you bend it, it snaps. The American military structure is a heavy steel chain. It is ugly, it is unpolished, it clanks together, but it wraps around the blade and crushes it.